Welcome to the latest edition of Tune Diving. This is the Indo Answers, and today we'll be looking at a truly brilliant composition from Anirudh Ravichandra, the song So Baby from the film Doctor, sung by Ananthakrishnan alongside Anirudh himself. We'll be looking at the techniques Anirudh uses in order to make us dance and the features that make this such a memorable pop track in general. In this video, we're going to be focusing just on rhythm. This video will be structured as follows. Firstly, I'm going to give you some background information to help you understand the points that I will make. Then, I will pick out a few sections from the song and I will highlight noteworthy rhythmic features from these sections. So with that in mind, without further ado, let's jump right in. Before we get into the specifics though, we need to understand what Anirudh might want to achieve through this song. What might he want to achieve? Well, this song is an upbeat dance song, so his intent would probably be for the song to feel energetic and movable, something that's easy to dance to. So the question arises, how might this be possible? How can a song and its rhythms make people dance? The answer, at least in part, lies in a concept called syncopation. Syncopation just refers to the unexpected stress of beats. So there have been academic studies done with regards to how syncopated rhythms affect listeners. And there's one particular study that I want to show here. This study was conducted by music and neuroscience professors from Oxford and Aarhus University and examines the relationship between syncopation and body movement and pleasure. So they concluded their study by stating the following, quote, "Hence, there's an inverted U-shaped relationship between syncopation versus body movement and pleasure." Which basically means this: the higher the syncopation, the more we want to move, but only up to a point. After a point, it starts to have the opposite effect. So what Anirudh needs to do if he wants to make us move around is utilize what is considered here as medium level syncopation. Now, there isn't an official classification of what's, low level, medium level, and high level syncopation. That's subjective. But we can examine how Anirudh balances syncopated rhythms and unsyncopated rhythms. Because if it's medium level, there's probably a balance between the two. It's not either extreme, it's not completely unsyncopated, it's not completely syncopated, it's somewhere in the middle. So we can examine how Anirudh finds this balance. Essentially, how he finds the sweet spot right here. But that's not it. If Anirudh finds this balance in the exact same way throughout the whole song, it would start to lose its impact. As the same study we looked at before states, quote, "The characteristically constant repetition of the syncopated rhythms should lead to decreasing rhythmic unexpectedness and decreasing pleasure." So if Anirudh syncopates in the exact same way, to the exact same degree throughout the whole song, that will in turn become boring too. We'll become tired of it as listeners, right? So therefore, there needs to be variation. Anirudh needs to change things up once in a while in order for the listener to feel pleasurable and energized. So there are two things we should look for as we analyze the rhythms in this song. Firstly, how he uses syncopated rhythms and how he balances them with unsyncopated rhythms. And secondly, how he varies the way in which he finds this balance. Now, before we dive into specifics, one last thing. I just want to establish how I will notate and call these rhythms. I will follow a system commonly used in many forms of Western music. This song, So Baby, operates on a 4-beat cycle, similar to Aditalam essentially. So we will number our main beats as 1, 2, 3, and 4. So these 4 beats represent the 4 beats of a 4-beat cycle. Now, what we can do is we can split each beat. So we have these 4 beats. We can split each beat into 4 smaller beats as well. So this gives us 4 sets of 4 beats. So you have 4 beats, 4 beats, 4 beats, 4 beats. The first beat of each set, the first beat of each set we call the number itself. So it goes 1, 2, 3, 4. That's the first beat of each set. We just call the number itself. I will call this beat the downbeat, actually. So these beats in general, the main beats, the numbered beats, I will call them downbeats, as downbeat is the more musically appropriate term compared to main beats or something like that. So we call it 1, 2, 3, 4. These are called the downbeats. The second beat of each set we call E. The third beat of each set we call and. The fourth beat of each set we call up. So this gives us a rhythmic framework which goes 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a. Okay, so the downbeats are 1, 2, 3, 4, and these are the non-syncopated rhythms. These are the stressed beats, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. These are the downbeats. These are non-syncopated. And whenever you hear the rhythms coming on the E, and, or up, those are the syncopated beats, okay? So when I say syncopated rhythms, it's rhythms that fall in the E, and, or up. So this is the rhythmic framework, the 1E and the 2E and the 3E and the 4E and the. That's the rhythmic framework that we will be using to analyze the song. So now, finally, let's get to the song. So first, let's listen to this opening section once. And I want all of you to try and clap to where you think the downbeats lie. Basically, where you think the pulse is, where you just might clap to in general. Don't overthink it, just go with your gut. So I suspect there's two possible ways that you may have approached the clapping here. You may have clapped in this spot, or you may have clapped in this spot. I think both would be reasonable instincts. The reason why both may be reasonable is because of the way Anirudh treats the percussion in the opening of this song. The way the rhythms have quite strong syncopation while still to some extent establishing the downbeats. Technically, we would place the downbeats here. So this would line up with the first clapping approach that I showed. However, the way Anantakrishnan sings his jati lines makes this a little confusing and hence may lead people to clap in line with the second approach. Let's examine the rhythms here and the parts that line up with the downbeats as well as the rhythms that syncopate. Firstly, notice that the syllables Anantakrishnan stresses, the ones that he emphasizes, are actually not the syllables on the downbeats. It's actually mostly the syllables on the and. So he goes chikatada, 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 chikatada. So, that's basically 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a. He's not going 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a. That's not what he's doing. He's not going chikatada, chikatada. He's not doing that. He's stressing the and. So he's going chikatada, 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 chikatada. So he's syncopating a lot here by stressing the and in the next measure, there's even more syncopation going on. He stresses the E and the up beats as well. So there's an incredible amount of syncopation going on here. Particularly the and is stressed so much to an extent that to some people, the and may seem like the downbeat. But as you may remember, if we have just syncopation, that won't be pleasurable for us listeners. There needs to be at least some balance between syncopated and non-syncopated rhythms. So even amidst all of this syncopation, Anirudh needs to establish the downbeats, at least to some degree. Look at the first measure and we see how he does this. The jati simply repeats a 4-syllable phrase, chikatada, those 4 syllables. And the start of each repetition of this phrase, where this phrase starts, every time it comes on the downbeat. So the start of this phrase always comes in line with the downbeat in the first measure. Therefore, having each repetition start on the downbeat helps establish the downbeat, despite the large amount of syncopation happening at the same time. The balancing act between establishing the downbeats and bringing in syncopation becomes even more complicated once many of the other parts come in. The shaker part plays completely on the and, while this siren-like synth part has a rhythmic pattern loosely based on the downbeat. On top of all of this, you have this almost chaotic cowbell part, which plays mostly on the E and upbeats. So again, we see Anirudh balancing his rhythms in a way which at least starts to establish the downbeats, while also adding plenty of syncopation in there too. So in the opening portion, we've seen that Anirudh does create a balance between non-syncopated and syncopated rhythms, even though it's a little heavy towards the syncopated side. And that's fine. Remember, Anirudh needs to create variety in his rhythms to make sure that the listeners don't get tired of the rhythms, that we don't get bored. And the opening isn't exactly the portion where he needs the listeners to be dancing around. So starting a bit towards the syncopated side actually gives him scope to, later on in the song, go right to the sweet spot in the parts of the song where he really wants to make us dance. So with this idea of balance in mind, the next spot I want to look at is the "So Baby Don't You Break My Heart," that part of the song. Now, there's two things that I want to look at in this section. The first is something called a tresillo, which is very, very prominent in this section of the song and actually throughout the song as well. So first, let me talk you through what a tresillo is. The tresillo is a specific rhythmic pattern that is often used nowadays in hip hop and pop. It goes like this. Yeah, that's the rhythm. It's just those three beats. That's the tresillo, and you just loop it over and over, play it over and over. And we can trace the origins of this tresillo beat, the one that I just showed you, back to Cuban jazz music. So in Cuban jazz music and also in Latin music, there's a specific beat pattern used called the son clave. So the son clave rhythm goes like this. So that's the son clave rhythm. And if you take the first half of the son clave rhythm, well, that's the tresillo. So the tresillo came about by just looping the first half of the son clave rhythm. So the son clave rhythm in its entirety is ba, 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 ba. If we take just the first half and loop it, it goes ba, 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 ba. That's the tresillo. So that's where the tresillo comes from. It came from just looping the first half of the son clave rhythm. And you hear this tresillo rhythm everywhere, in Indian pop and in Western pop. So I'll show you a few examples right now. Now, what makes the tresillo so special? Why is it used so frequently in pop music? For the answer, we go back to something we've already discussed in this video, the balance between establishing the downbeats and creating syncopation. In this simple tresillo rhythm alone, we see this balance perfectly. The tresillo, at least the way it's used in this song, always starts on the downbeat. This helps establish the downbeat really clearly. Both the other two beats in the tresillo are syncopated. So with this mixture of downbeats and syncopation, the tresillo becomes the perfect rhythm to feel like bopping our heads to. It hits that sweet spot of medium syncopation. So now let me show you how this tresillo rhythm is used in this section of So Baby.
So baby, don't you break my heart. So baby, don't you break my heart. Don't you dare break my heart. So baby, don't you break my heart. So baby.
Now in this same section, there's another rhythmic feature that I feel is significant. Remember how in the opening, we said that there weren't actually any instruments that were emphasizing the downbeats that much. We were relying on the phrasing of the jati to get a hold of the downbeat. Even when Anirudh's vocals come in, this still remains true. It's still the placement of the lyrics, as the words start on the downbeats, that helps establish the downbeats. So in that opening, even if we include the pallavi, it's only the vocals that help establish the downbeat. However, this changes once we get to the So Baby Don't You Break My Heart part. In that part, now we have a subtle but yet still audible part that plays the downbeats. The part sounds like a ride cymbal and it plays on the downbeats. It plays exactly on beats 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's the first instrument to really emphasize these beats so far in the song. This actually sets us up for the second part that I want to look at, the interlude. While the So Baby Don't You Break My Heart, that part was subtle in its emphasis of the downbeats, the section that we're going to look at, the interlude, is very explicit in its emphasis of the downbeats. There's a very strong emphasis on the downbeats created by the kick drum in this section. The kick drum is quite loud and is very clearly audible for any listener. So for the first time in the song, there's an obvious instrument that really explicitly emphasizes the downbeats. But of course, as you know by now, we need balance. Balance between establishing the downbeat and creating syncopation. So how does Anirudh achieve this balance here? This is where something called sidechain compression comes in. So what is sidechain compression? Simply put, sidechain compression essentially describes a certain relationship between instruments in terms of their volumes or loudness. Let's take, for example, the kick drum and bass part. So let's say the kick drum plays on the downbeats, beats 1, 2, 3, 4, as it does in this section of the song. So the volume of the kick drum might look something like this. Now, what happens to the bass part then, you might ask? Well, essentially it works in the opposite direction. When the kick drum is loud, the bass part goes soft. When the kick drum is getting softer, the bass part gets louder. This is the basic idea. When one gets loud, the other gets soft, and when the other gets loud, the other gets soft, right? So it works in opposite directions. So what this creates is a really cool effect. Firstly, we hear the kick drum more clearly because the bass part is out of the way. Remember, with sidechain compression, when the kick drum is loud, the bass part is soft. So because the bass part is soft, it's out of the way and we can hear the kick drum more clearly. In this part of the song, the kick drum plays exactly on the downbeats. So if we hear the kick drum more clearly, that means we feel the downbeats better. But in addition, the bass part essentially becomes syncopated. Remember, the bass part grows in volume when the kick drum isn't playing. The kick drum is playing on the downbeats. That means the bass part comes out exactly not on the downbeats. So it's syncopated, right? So you get this really cool balance between the kick drum that's really establishing the downbeats and the bass that's really syncopated because it's growing when it's not on the downbeat. Remember, the kick plays on the downbeat. When the kick plays, the bass is soft. When the kick is not playing, the bass grows. And when the kick is not playing is exactly where the syncopated rhythms are. So the bass, you essentially get this, if this is the kick drum, for example, you get this kind of effect, right? It just grows in volume when the kick drum is not playing. So it sounds syncopated. So you get this balance between the kick drum that's playing the downbeats and the bass part that's syncopated. Anirudh seemingly uses sidechain compression in this interlude. Sidechain compression is used with the kick drum against the bass and synths. So when the kick drum is loud, the bass and synth parts go soft. And when the kick drum is getting softer, the bass and synth parts get louder, making the bass and synth parts syncopated. The next section I want to look at has another rhythmic shift. We saw that in the opening, it was heavy on syncopation. The emphasis on the downbeats was subtle. Then we looked at the section which used sidechain compression, the interlude, which strongly emphasized all four downbeats. In the Charnam, he has another small rhythmic shift where he emphasizes the 2 and 4, so beats 2 and 4. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are the beats that he emphasizes in at least the first half of the Charnam. At the start of the Charnam, we hear this electronic snare part playing on beats 2 and 4. This is then doubled with the tabla later on, which also emphasizes beats 2 and 4. You have the kick drum, sometimes playing on beat 1, but also syncopating itself a little bit. I'm going to talk about the kick drum a bit more later on, so no need to worry about the specifics there. So once again, we see the balancing act between establishing the downbeats, as this emphasizes the 2 and 4, while also having a decent amount of syncopation with the kick drum. But yet he achieves this balance between syncopated rhythms and non-syncopated rhythms in a different way compared to the way he has achieved this balance in previous parts of the song. We've never had this emphasis on 2 and 4 specifically so far in the song, so this emphasis on 2 and 4 creates variety.
இதுவரை பார்த்த பெண்ணில் உனை போல என யாருமே அழகாலே கொன்று தின்று உயிர் மீட்டு தரவில்லையே இதுவரை பார்த்த பெண்ணில் உனை போல என யாருமே அழகாலே கொன்று தின்று உயிர் மீட்டு தரவில்லையே.
Now actually, when we look at the whole Charnam, something very interesting happens. Firstly, the emphasis on the 2 and 4 starts to fade. This emphasis on beats 2 and 4 was just a temporary rhythmic shift, just to add some variety. So once we get to the Unnodu Nadikindra line, the emphasis on beats 2 and 4 starts to fade.
இதுவரை பார்த்த பெண்ணில் உனை போல என யாருமே அழகாலே கொன்று தின்று உயிர் மீட்டு தரவில்லையே உன்னோடு நடக்கின்ற சிறு தூரம் கிடைக்கின்ற சில நேரம் என் வாழ்வின் வரமாகவே இரவெல்லாம் உனை தேடி அலைகின்றேன் கிடைத்தும் நான் தொலைகின்றேன் புயல் காற்றில் விளக்காகவே. So baby
More significantly though, I mentioned the syncopation in the kick drum part. It is syncopation, yes, but it's not just random syncopation. There's something particularly cool going on. Recall our discussion about the tresillo rhythm. Remember, the tresillo is the thing that goes... And we looked at how it's used in so many different pop songs around the world. So there's two things that I want you to kind of recall here. Firstly, we said that it was a key rhythm, an important rhythm in the So Baby Don't You Break My Heart line. And this line, this part, the So Baby Don't You Break My Heart, is actually the part that comes right after the Charnam. So the Charnam is leading into this line. Okay, so just keep that in mind. And secondly, we also said that the tresillo rhythm is a rhythm that establishes a really good balance between establishing the downbeats and creating syncopation. And, you know, it achieves that medium syncopation. And so it's used in many pop and dance songs in order to build energy. It's the perfect rhythm to build energy. Okay, so just keep those two things in mind. So with that in mind, let's look at the kick drum part in the Charnam. Let's start with the first half of the Charnam. The kick drum part looks like this. So you see that it starts off with the tresillo rhythm appearing every 2 measures. So it still has the tresillo rhythm, but it doesn't come up that often. And this is pretty much all the kick drum does apart from one note in between. So it's still got syncopation and all that, and so it maintains some energy. It has the tresillo a little bit, but the frequency of notes is low, so it feels a bit more relaxing compared to the sections that we'll look at right after this. Now, once we get into the unnode narikinra portion, the frequency of the tresillo doubles. The tresillo is a great rhythm to use to bring in energy, as we said. So as the frequency of the tresillo increases, the energy starts to build up a bit more too. We also hear the tresillo in the vocal part, and the tresillo in the kick drum lines up perfectly with the tresillo in the vocals. The fact that they line up perfectly with the vocals gives the song a bit more depth and power, helping it give more energy as well. So the song is getting energetic here, and we can see Anirudh creating this energy by increasing the frequency of the tresillo and also by lining it up perfectly with the vocals too. And as we enter the "So Baby Don't You Break My Heart" line, the frequency of the tresillo doubles once again. So this adds even more energy to this section of the song. And as this section is the peak of the build-up and it's coming right before the drop, it makes sense that this section should be very energetic. And that's why the frequency of the tresillo is really high, and the frequency of notes in the kick drum in general is very high. There's just a lot of notes, and there's a lot of tresillos, right? The frequency of the tresillo has increased once again, as I just said. And more notes help build more intensity, and so that's how Anirudh creates intensity here. Additionally, as the melody here is also based on the tresillo rhythm, the kick drum once again lines up perfectly with the vocals. They're both singing and playing the tresillo rhythm. So once again, the fact that the two parts have similar rhythms gives it more depth and power, which adds energy. And as we have said previously, the tresillo is a perfect rhythm to get people to dance because of the balance between syncopated and non-syncopated rhythms within the tresillo itself. So this is the section where Anirudh really wants to get people hyped up. And so increasing the frequency of the tresillo just makes a lot of sense.
இதுவரை பார்த்த பெண்ணில் உனைப் போல என யாருமே அழகாலே கொன்று தின்று உயிர் மீட்டு தரவில்லையே இதுவரை பார்த்த பெண்ணில் உனைப் போல என யாருமே அழகாலே கொன்று தின்று உயிர் மீட்டு தரவில்லையே உன்னோடு நடக்கின்ற சிறு தூரம் கிடைக்கின்ற சில நேரம் என் வாழ்வின் வரமாகவே இரவெல்லாம் உன்னை தேடி அலைகின்றேன் கிடைத்தும் நான் தொலைகின்றேன் புயல் காற்றில் விளக்காகவே So baby don't you break my heart So baby don't you break my heart Don't you dare break my
We've emphasized throughout the video the importance of rhythmic variety, and we see this perfectly illustrated in the kick drum part we just looked at, as the frequency of the tresillos changes, specifically increases, throughout the Chadnam and into the So Baby line. There's always a balance between syncopated and non-syncopated rhythms, but the way Anirudh strikes this balance changes throughout the Chadnam, as the kick drum pattern helps illustrate. So today in this video, we dissected some of the rhythmic aspects of So Baby, which make the song so danceable and pleasurable. We started off by looking at studies which told us two key things. Firstly, that a healthy balance between emphasizing the downbeats and having syncopation is most pleasurable for most listeners, and that having the same rhythmic structure over and over would decrease enjoyment. With this in mind, we looked at how Anirudh sets up his rhythms in order to make it pleasurable for listeners. We started with the opening, which was relatively high on syncopation, but still emphasized the downbeats through some of its vocal parts. Then we looked at the So Baby line, which started to make the downbeats a bit more prominent. After that, we looked at the portion which used sidechain compression, which really emphasized the downbeats but through sidechain compression also created a syncopated bass and synth part. We also looked at the Chandam, where Anirudh has a slightly different rhythmic structure as he emphasized beats 2 and 4. Amidst all this, we also took a dive into the tresillo, which can be heard throughout the song and which innately has a balance between downbeats and syncopated rhythms. Alright, that does it for today. I hope everybody enjoyed this video, and if you did, please do not forget to like, share, and subscribe. Please let me know in the comments below if you have any thoughts or suggestions with regards to this video or future videos that you want me to make. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.